Um, Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. And what we're going to be talking about today is actually kind of an article that I wrote a couple months back, which was 5 manufacturing bottlenecks. And then we are going to talk about specifically how DriveWorks and automation can help solve them. The original white paper didn't focus explicitly on DriveWorks. It just focused on bottlenecks in manufacturing and what we can do about them. So I'll be sure to post a link to that as soon as I can. I'll try to put that in the chat for you. But the first thing I should probably do is tell you who I am. So in case you don't know, I'm Sweeney, and I am a marketing and communication specialist with GoEngineer. Had my bachelor's degree from The Ohio State University in 2018. Some fun facts about me. Yes, I'm a huge sports fan. Go Bucks, go Crew. World traveler. I've been very fortunate to see a lot of the United States. And in 2017, I was also incredibly fortunate to intern at DriveWorks over in the United Kingdom. And I got to travel around Europe and see some amazing places. I run a lot. I actually ran at lunch earlier today. And I'm a nerd about everything. I take that as a badge of pride. So I have no shame saying that. So whatever my hyperfixation is of the week, that is what I'm being a nerd about. Before I jump into this whole who is GoEngineer, I am not alone in this presentation. So I'm going to let the man with one of the coolest job titles I know introduce himself. And that is Mr. Paul Gimbel, the DriveWorks Sherpa.
Yep. Thanks. Yeah, DriveWorks Sherpa is my actual title. That's what it says on my business cards. I've been doing design automation primarily with DriveWorks for almost 20 years now. And I've been in the SolidWorks community all the way since SolidWorks 95, one of the first SolidWorks trainers. So been doing this quite a bit of time. I don't run. I kind of hate running, but I do cycle. So yeah, I'll see if I can match your mileage tonight when I hop on Zwift.
Oh, you'll smoke me in mileage. So before we get into the meat of the presentation, I have to do the obligatory, like, who is GoEngineer, so that you kind of know who you are, who you're talking to. And the short answer for who is GoEngineer, we are everything. We do all kinds of stuff. So training is a huge part of what we do. So we do have self-paced training, which is on demand. I want to do a lesson at 7 p.m. You can do a lesson at 7 p.m. You can do a lesson at 5 in the morning when the baby wakes you up if you want to. But you can also do in-person training. You can do virtual with an instructor, live on camera, kind of like what we're doing right now. We do have a very successful YouTube channel, one that we're very proud of. We cleared 120,000 subscribers pretty recently. And it's actually kind of funny. I had one of my coworkers tell me that the first time he went on site after he joined GoEngineer, the customer said, "Wait, GoEngineer, like the YouTube channel?" It's yeah, we have a YouTube channel. It does quite well. But that's just part of it. So that's how we're sharing a lot of information with you guys. And that's where you'll find this webinar in the next couple of weeks. It's going to be up on YouTube. So if you're watching us there, hello, welcome. GoEngineer has been around for a very long time, 35 years. If you trust what I have to say, you should definitely trust GoEngineer because it's been around at least 8 years longer than I have. So I do like bringing that up just because it's kind of fun. But GoEngineer has been around forever. Ken Coburn started out with AutoCAD and just 2D CAD stuff, and now we've gotten into SolidWorks and the 3D Experience platform and DriveWorks, and we haven't looked back. We are everywhere. I'll show you guys a map here in a couple of minutes, but spoiler alert, every single state is represented on there except for 2, but that's just because they didn't fit on the map, not because we don't support them. And then 2 other things over on the left-hand side, I want to make sure to bring up very specifically the customer portal. So if you are a GoEngineer customer, you should definitely check that out. That's how you can get technical support. You can manage your licenses. You can request new quotes. You can schedule your application mentoring sessions, which are 1-hour one-on-ones with one of the GoEngineer engineers. And we can talk to you about kind of whatever you want. And we do have a GoEngineer online community. I'm going to skip to this next slide just so that I can give you guys the QR code, because the community is kind of like Reddit, except for better, I think, because the community is by engineers for engineers. That's what we're talking about. And it is something that you can go on there and you can say, I'm having trouble doing this, or I'm wondering what people's opinions are about that. And you can put whatever you want in there. It's entirely for the engineering community. It is moderated by GoEngineer, so I'm one of the moderators. But we're not using it to scratch it. We're not using it to scrape information or anything like that. We're using it purely as a way to let you guys talk. It's kind of like the old SolidWorks forums before they went behind 3D Experience. So if you are curious about it, you can sign up for free. It's for anybody. It's not just for GoEngineer customers. People all around the world are members. So there's a QR code right here. If you want to take a screenshot of it and go create an account later, feel free. But we do all kinds of stuff. So different QR codes right here if you're interested in it. Like I said, here's the map. we're nationwide. The only 2 states not on here are Alaska and Hawaii, and that's because they didn't fit. They are in our territory. We do service them. So if you are in the United States, chances are you can call up GoEngineer and we can work with you on pretty much anything you want. But enough of the backstory. We're going to talk now about manufacturing bottlenecks. And the gist of a bottleneck is like it slows you down. And it's kind of a pain. As we're going through this, if you have questions, Goldcast has a really cool Q&A section over on the right-hand side of your screen. So you can go in there and you can type in a question. Paul and I are going to have time for questions at the end, hopefully. And we can bring your questions live on stage if we want to try to answer them there, or we can just type those out to you. It's also just a meeting chat. So if you guys want to talk with all the other people here, go ahead and do that. The recording is going to be available and it's going to be here. So like if you want to come back tomorrow and rewatch this webinar because you can't get enough of what Paul and I have to say, you can come back, use the same link and rewatch this webinar if you so choose. And we'll put it up on YouTube as well. Just that's not going to be immediate. We're going to have to process it and probably cut out the very beginning of this. But that's the Goldcast Q&A, and let's talk about these bottlenecks. So if you haven't read the article, I started out talking about Rework. And the reason I want to start out with Rework is it is, in my opinion, one of the most obvious issues that we have. Because for me, I look at Rework, and Paul, I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily think about Rework as just remaking something. I'm truly trying to look at it more as any step that you repeat, any redoing of any kind of work, that's wasted effort because you've now done it twice. If you enter in a dimension in 2 locations when you really should have only had to enter it in 1, you've wasted the 8 seconds it took you to do that. Now, 8 seconds isn't a lot, but it can really be it can add up and it can be very, very helpful. And ultimately, like not automate kind of slows you down. But Paul, the thing I want your thoughts on here is you said to me, one of the things that kills a relationship with a customer the quickest, or with anybody really, is like you throw them under the bus. You tell them, well, here's what you signed. You agreed to this. Because like the biggest headache I always found in doing pre-sales for PDM and with DriveWorks and doing implementations was customer would give you some information and you'd say, great, perfect. I can work with that. And you manufacture something, you design something, and then you go back to the customer and say, this is what you asked for. And they say, no, it's not. That's not what I meant. Like, is that not the biggest, one of the biggest headaches in the entire world of consulting and just in life in general, like a misunderstanding, a gap because of inconsistency and human error?
Yeah. And again, I've been in this industry for about 20 years, but what I was initially just thought about was the first job I had coming out of engineering school. I worked in an engineering department making valve strainers for the water, oil, and gas industry. And even there, we could start to see one of the biggest problems we had was we would get something come down from sales. It was usually a piece of paper. This was even before email. That's how old I am. And they would say, hey, this is what the customer ordered. This is what I sold. And all the engineers would look at it and they didn't give us half of the information that we need. And then we'd have to go back upstairs. They'd have to call the customer again. Hi, I really don't know what I'm doing. I forgot to ask you for. So, and that's the kind of rework that even in the sales process, having to go back to the customer. But sometimes it'll be worse. And the situation that you discussed will come up where they'll say, well, you know what? I'm assuming that he wanted this. Ooh, bad idea, right? Making assumptions.
Yeah.
But what we try to do with automation is we try to take the process and make it consistent. We try to collect complete, accurate, manufacturable information right at the beginning. And we always started in our evolution with the Excel spreadsheet. I've got a form, maybe even a paper form. They have to fill in this stuff. Right now we've progressed to the point where we can say, look, let's walk the customer through what it is that they're configuring, what it is that they're ordering. Give them some feedback and say, look, this is what we're going to ship you at the end. So there's no surprise. You don't have that situation of, hey, that's not what I ordered. Yeah, we discussed this. You saw it. You rotated it around in 3D. You saw what the performance characteristics were going to be. We calculated them for you. So by being able to automate all of this, it gives us the ability to make everything consistent, to guarantee that we don't miss anything that would force us to have to do it again.
There's also, I think, the issue of, and like this is the more common thing that people think about, which is you fat fingered a number. You try to type in
Mhm.
10, but you hit 12 or you hit worse 120. And it's like the basis of all of those scammer payback videos on YouTube. Like they hit an extra 0 and now it's all kinds of a problem. That's a problem in engineering and in design and in manufacturing. It is, in that case, the materials, because we're now being inconsistent with our calculations, or if we apply a formula in the wrong way or something like that. If you're not automating the design, whether that is with SolidWorks equations, whether that's with variables inside of DriveWorks, whether that is just pen and paper, however you're applying these formulas and this knowledge that you need to share, which we'll talk all about knowledge here in a little bit, but you have to make sure that you're applying that knowledge consistently, or applying those rules, to use the DriveWorks term. You have to apply them the correct way. Otherwise, you're going to impact the first pass yield, which is like you're going to have fewer perfect products out of the total number produced. And like this is all walks of life. Paul, you were talking about when you were working on the fittings. I can't remember exactly the word you said, but before you started doing DriveWorks, like this is true even in the food industry. Like my sister works in food quality inspection. Now she's well before it gets to the plate. But every time she and I talk, it's never like, yeah, I sat at my desk and nothing went wrong on the floor at all today. That's not how anything works. There's always problems. So anything that we can do to take out the manual step, because any chance that I'm allowed to touch the calculator and put in information is a chance I'm going to screw it up. So it's a whole lot better to let a machine do it.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of being able to prevent those mistakes, but one thing that I've seen throughout my career kind of blossom is the whole design for series of aspects that have been added to design, right? So we don't want an error to happen when they're manufacturing. Okay, well, let's start to think about that when we design for manufacturability. Let's start to take into accountability, starting to take into account when we do the design, how is this thing going to be manufactured? How is it going to be assembled? How is it going to be shipped? How is it going to be maintained? Design for all these things. We can now bring that farther up because the tools that we have in SolidWorks allow us to take that into consideration and to build that into our designs. And when we start to automate, again, the whole idea is now we're taking control of that process. We're making it consistent. We're thinking it through before we start selling it. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea now is that, okay, once we get to that first pass, we're going to have more perfect products coming out because we've thought through what's going to happen in manufacturing, what's going to happen on the assembly line, what's going to happen before it gets to inspection. So automation especially, and I keep talking about automation because, well, that's what I do for a living. It really allows us to take that into account. It pushes us to go ahead and consider all those things when we build our designs and capture all that design intent inside of SolidWorks and DriveWorks.
So this was not on the original talking list of points that we came up with. And if you're watching this and you're confused and you're like, wait, why are there not more visuals? This is a lot more like Paul and I did a podcast back in February. And it was purely just like going back and forth and talking about topics. And that's kind of what this is going to be. We're just going to kind of talk about these topics, what we found and what it means. Paul, I have to ask you, because you said automation. Like this whole thing's about automation. Mm-hmm. There's always fear of automation. There's always like, well, what if it automates me out of a job? And you and I have talked about this multiple times, but the way I see that is automation, particularly with like CAD design, it's not going to necessarily like replace someone's job. It's going to change it or augment it or modify it. That's the way I always see it. What are kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So again, to go back to me coming right out of college and going into my first job as what I thought was a designer, we made valve strainers and we made them in different sizes. But it's the same design. But I had to create all of these drawings in AutoCAD that were just the same drawing, just in different sizes. And I was ready to design stuff. I was, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And that's what I thought I was going to be doing, was designing all this stuff. But it turns out, no, I was just taking the same design and making a new drawing for it for this job that came in, making a new drawing for this job that came in. So when we talk about automation, automating people out of jobs, the only job it's going to automate you out of is doing file save as all day. What it actually does is it actually frees you up so that you can do, instead of rework, you're now doing new product design. You're actually being an engineer, being a designer, being what you thought you were going to school for. So what it really does is it takes the non-value added tasks out of the equation.
Which I think is the entire thing that Rework is. Rework is,
Absolutely.
by definition, not value add. It does nothing for your process other than slow it down and bottleneck it, kind of the top of the presentation. So I think automation has a lot of, obviously there's a lot we can do with automation. And I think that kind of dovetails into the next part of this, which is, where's my arrow? Inconsistent quoting. And Paul, I was going to interject and say, ooh, let's talk about that now. Earlier when you were saying, hey, the salesperson has to go back to a customer and they have to get the set piece of information, which that is inconsistent quoting. And I wrote in the article, I said the customer interactions with you should be akin to their previous interactions. And really what I'm just saying there is when you talk to a customer, it needs to be the same interaction every single time, ideally. Though I'm going to caution that and say, like, we don't want to be robots, but we want to standardize and talk consistently with our customers and gather the correct information in a consistent manner. I'm going to use the example of one of my favorite brands, which is Nike.com. I want them to use DriveWorks. So if someone from Nike is watching this, like, hi, hello, we should talk about DriveWorks. When you go on Nike, I said I run a lot. I go on there and I buy new shoes. And I buy them online because I buy the same brand of shoes every time. I buy the Pegasus shoes. I love them. They've been around for like 40 years or whatever it is. But I go online and I find the Pegasus shoes. And then I get to pick my color. And then I get to pick from my color, I get to pick my size. And oftentimes the color that I want does not exist in size 8.5 because I have little tiny feet. So I can't always get the exact shoes that I want, but it's a guided process. It's taking me every single time from A to Z. I'm not missing anything. I'm not going to have a situation where a shoe shows up and I go, this isn't what I asked for. Because the quoting process, it's now consistent. It's the same thing every single time. It's accurate. I'm always going to get something that's possible to make. And it's very fast. Like I can order shoes in 5 minutes. Like Paul, I could order shoes while you're talking about guided selling here in a second. And you never know because I'm not going to be swearing at my screen and saying, come on, you know what I'm trying to do. Like it will work. It will go exactly the way I want. But you immediately brought up guided selling when I mentioned quoting to you. And that's something that I've got a little video I'm going to play while you kind of talk about that. But I think that is, even in your words, and I think you're definitely right, one of the more undervalued aspects of using a CPQ system. And I have a story about quoting I'll tell after it. But I'd love for you to kind of give your 2 cents or 20 cents about guided selling.
And inflation's even hitting the webinars. So the thing about DriveWorks, and whenever anybody hears DriveWorks, they're like, oh, that's the one that makes SolidWorks run itself. And yeah, it does. And that, frankly, it's cool. That's why most people know it, because it's really cool that it does that. But what people do is when they get DriveWorks is they'll say, okay, well, I want to have DriveWorks automate my SolidWorks models, and they'll go ahead and they'll have it automatically making SolidWorks. But once they start to realize that, well, I have these places where I'm capturing here, we're capturing the height for my shelving unit, or I'm capturing the width for my shelving unit, the depth for my shelving unit. They start out by saying, okay, well, let me see what I need to put into SolidWorks, and I'll go ahead and put that into DriveWorks. Then they start to realize that, well, when my customer puts stuff in, a lot of times these are not the dimensions that they'll know. They know the size of the room this has to fit in, or they'll know something else that's more really from their perspective than it is from the SolidWorks model perspective. So DriveWorks is all about rules. It's all about intelligence. It's all about collecting inputs, doing calculations and transformations on them to be able to generate outputs. And once you start to realize that, oh, DriveWorks has all this capability in it, then what you do is you start to capture what information your customer knows, what information you need from your customers, and you start providing an interface or an experience where they can be guided through the process of how to design one of your units, right? So pressure vessel is a perfect example that I always think about. because I used to design pressure
You told
vessels.
me I would have used the pressure vessel demo.
There you go. So, so when I'm doing the head or the end of the pressure vessel, I need to know the thickness of the material. When I go to buy a pressure vessel, I don't care what the thickness of the material is. I just know it has to withhold 150 PSI. So the idea with guided selling is we work with the customer. We put them through capturing the information that they know and then help them to understand how that translates into the design and say, okay, this is what you told me you need. You need something to handle 150 PSI. It has to hold water. It has to have a flow rate of this. It has to have heat transfer of this. It has to have this accessory and this accessory. Here's what we have that we think will be the perfect product for you. And that's huge because that gives us a couple opportunities. Number one, we know we have complete, accurate information because we asked them for the information. So we know we have everything we need. No more of that, oh, sales has to call them back thing. Next, we can validate. We can say, okay, you know what? You want to put in a pressure? I want to make sure they don't put in 75,000 PSI because we can't make that. So now we have the ability to validate the information that they're putting in. And we can apply these rules, do these live calculations, and we can figure out, okay, if they want 150 PSI of water, the head thickness has to be this. We can calculate everything that SolidWorks is going to need downstream. Plus, we can calculate everything that we need in order to determine the price, determine shipping, determine availability, to see if we already have it, to see if it's something we've already made. And now all of a sudden, we've taken this guided process and we're no longer just generating a model. Now we're actually figuring out what is the best design for them. We can look at it and say, you know what? We have some standards. Let me see if they'll be okay with a standard because it'll save them money. It'll be able to get them faster shipping. No, they want a custom one? Great, no problem. We can do that too. So through that whole guided selling process, we walk them through, and it also, frankly, from a sales perspective, it gives us the opportunity to upsell them and cross-sell them also. If they say, oh, I need 150 PSI, oh, did you know that we also offer this kind of lining on the inside to protect it from the water? We can provide them information that they would not have otherwise known about, or, and a lot of times you'll end up, they'll pick new options, which they didn't even know they had, and they can see how the pricing changes. So you don't have as many back and forths of, oh, that's too expensive. Can you do something cheaper? Okay, how about this? And you're not sending quotes back and forth because you're guiding them through the whole process. And at the end, they have a product and they look at this and they say, hey, that's my product. I designed that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the computer's designed the same one 743 times, but they don't care. To them, it's special. It's their product. They've designed it. They have this kind of psychological attachment to it now. And guess what? They're willing to pay more for it too. That's customizability and the guided selling process.
I think the interesting thing that you kind of danced around it there, but it's that you are not an expert in the products of your customers, or your customers are not an expert in your product. Yep. They are an expert in the application of your product. They know that they need it to meet the following requirements. They don't really care about the design of it, unless they're just like total sickos and they just want to dive into all the minutia of the CAD model. If they really care about that, okay.
We prefer the nerd term, the term nerd. Thank you.
That's fair. Unless they're a nerd, which, as I said, I'm a self-proclaimed nerd. But unless they're going to dive into all that minutia, frankly, they don't care. They just care about make this work, make this do the thing that I need it to do. And if you can do it that way, does it take a long time to build a quoting tool that can answer all of those questions, that can do the guided selling tool? Yes, it can. I'll tell you the story here in a second. But I would argue it's worth it in the case of now this product is mine. This product, I know it's going to do what I want. There's no question. There's no I think this will fit my needs. I think this satisfies everything. If I'm going through that checklist, the customer, if they're not going to be able to see every little thing, they're going to at least be able to say, well, they asked for all these questions. They asked for all these answers. I should be able to trust it. Speaking of the speed of the quoting process, I do have to tell a quick story because GoEngineer uses DriveWorks to quote services for all of our, at the very minimum, PDM customers, but it's also electrical. We do it for DriveWorks. We do it for SolidWorks services, a lot of our services are quoted using DriveWorks. That did not always used to be the case. That actually changed 14 months ago. CATI, where I actually worked previously, we were acquired by GoEngineer in like August, I think. And in October, one of our engineering directors came to me and said, hey, you're going to reimagine the GoEngineer quoting process. And Paul, I think you would agree, the first question that anybody should ask is, okay, what is the quoting process right now?
Mm-hmm.
And as is the case with, I would say, the majority of our customers, I was told we use Microsoft Excel to build our quotes. And my jaw hit the floor because I went, why? Why? What do you do? Why do you do this to yourself? And I'm not going to dive too far into this because I'm actually presenting about this at DriveWorks World. So if you are a DriveWorks customer watching this, register for DriveWorks World. Derek Loss and Joe Isawa and I are going to dive into this. It's called QuoteWorks. And we'll talk all about it and some of the challenges. But we had to reimagine that process. And I'm not going to tell you it was easy. I started it in October. I think I released version 1 like mid to late December. It's still in development. And the goal of phase 1 was make it work, make it generate these quotes quickly and accurately, which it does. It does a great job. We've done hundreds and hundreds of these quotes. I was actually going through the actual number yesterday, and I was floored by that's how many we've done. And it keeps growing and evolving. And that's kind of the thing. Like now we're looking downstream at those processes. It allows you to be more involved with it, something that we'll talk about in a little bit. But we're thinking about every eventuality downstream. We're not just thinking about the here and now. We're not just thinking about, make this work. Instead, it's going to be, how can we give the best experience to people that are using this tool? It's a fascinating case study, watching it and seeing all of the different things that have happened. And I have since handed it off because I was in engineering. Now I'm over in marketing, but it's a very interesting thing, like building a quoting process, building a quoting tool. It's an incredibly powerful tool. And it's one that I hope in like 3 years, GoEngineer is going to go, how do we ever live without this? Because now it's scalable, now it's consistent, now it's effective. So one of the big problems with an Excel-based quoting system is it's not scalable. And when I talk about it's not scalable, what I'm really talking about is it's really hard to train people up. It's hard to get people to learn all of the new things. It's hard to add people. And if you need to make changes, it's not very easy to make changes. And it's also hard to deploy it to multiple people. There's all kinds of issues with using Microsoft Excel, which leads us into retraining, which is the third bottleneck that I came up with as I was looking through 5 bottlenecks for manufacturing. When I initially wrote this, I was thinking about, what if someone wins the lottery and they say, all right, I'm retiring, I'm done. Well, now you have to train up a new person. But Paul, you said to me, hey, mergers and acquisitions are also a thing, and there's new hires, and there's, and I should have been thinking about mergers and acquisitions because I was a merger and acquisition when CHI was brought into the GoEngineer fold. Retraining is one of those things that you don't realize how much of a pain it's going to be, but man, tribal knowledge, is that not the most ubiquitous term in the world of engineering?
It absolutely is. Yeah, I was actually working with one company up in Minnesota, and they make architectural products. Like when you go to a hotel, you go up a set of stairs, and there's that door that goes out onto the roof where they have the final fight scene with the bad guys. They make those, and they make a bunch of other things. And they said, you know what, we want to get into this other product line. They didn't want to start from scratch. They bought another company. So what they had at that point, they had DriveWorks designing these roof hatches and floor hatches. And then they said, hey, we've got this other company that we just bought, and we bought their product line, but none of our salespeople know how to sell it. And they said, it's really complicated. It's got this, 72-digit product codes that they have to come up with. Is there any way that we can use DriveWorks to help our people who don't know this product develop those 72-digit codes? So what we did was we put together a quick guided selling interface that lets them go through and pick, oh, I want this material, I want this color, I want this texture, I want this option, this size, et cetera, et cetera. And it went ahead and DriveWorks built up that 72-digit code from all of the choices. So now you have these salespeople who've never had this product before. Now all of a sudden they have to sell this product. They can just jump into DriveWorks and instantly know how to walk their customers through purchasing this project. Now, the flip side of this was we had a bunch of new salespeople, well, that came from the company they just purchased, that knew that product inside and out. And they knew those 72-digit codes by heart. So what they wanted to do was to be able to jump into DriveWorks, just pop in the 72-digit code out of memory and have it automatically generate the drawings from there. And DriveWorks could do both of those. We could just give them a choice. Do you want to enter the code, or do you want to go and make the selections? And whichever one you did, it automatically populated the other.
I think the way you phrased it to me was it made the experts, it let them be experts. It was nice and easy. It was very intuitive, or it was very, it empowered the experts, and it was very intuitive for the newbies that had no idea what they were doing. I have that written on the next slide. I don't know why I'm trying to remember that by memory. But we're trying to make those newbies feel like experts and make sure those experts aren't inhibited by what they're trying to do. But it lets you scale so quickly, because I imagine in that scenario, like you bring on a new sales rep, instead of them having to build flashcards to try to memorize all these codes, now it's click, 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 click. Oh, I have a code.
Absolutely.
So this is one of those things where I think of retraining, and it's a headache when you run into it, but you might not be thinking about it at first. It's certainly not on the mind of everyone. Like when I mentioned I built QuoteWorks, I wasn't thinking about make this the easiest tool to use. I was thinking make it work. And now the focus of my colleagues that have taken the project over from me, since I've switched over what I'm doing, they are very focused on make this easy to use, because as we spin up and bring on new departments, we've got to make sure that those people have an easy time using it, because otherwise you struggle with adoption. Otherwise you struggle to get people on board. But if you make it a simple process, if you make it so that the newbies feel like experts right off the bat, makes it way easier to get adoption.
Can I throw something else in here? So one thing I see a lot, and I would call it retraining and cross-training. And I don't mean also cycling, because you're spending too much time running, but so when we start out, we'll typically be sitting with a customer and saying, okay, well, let's go ahead and let's figure out how your product is designed. And we go through the whole thing of, okay, we want to automate the generation of the SolidWorks models. But what they also want to do is they want to automate the quoting process to figure out how much this thing's going to cost before it goes to engineering. And we're typically working with engineering saying, okay, let's understand the design. But what always ends up happening is there is one person, I like to call it the Frank syndrome, because he's always named Frank, I don't know why, who's been the one person who is able to figure out how much these things are going to cost. There's one estimator, and you always ask, well, how do you figure out what the cost? Oh, we just have Frank estimate it. Well, now there's your bottleneck, right? You've got one Frank. But what we end up doing by automating the process is we take the information that Frank has, and we allow the salespeople to be able to have access to that information. They don't have to know it all, but they have a tool that will do the estimations for them. It takes the techniques that Frank has developed over 50 years and lets Frank go off and go fishing now. But the idea is now we're now taking these capabilities that engineers have in figuring out what the design is going to look like, the estimating capabilities that Frank has, and we're pushing them upstream to these salespeople who now have the ability to go through and more confidently sell products that they know are going to be manufacturable, they know are going to be priced right, they know what it's going to look like, because it's generating it all right there live for them.
I think I wrote in the article, it democratizes the information, because now we're not so reliant on Frank. Like if Frank wants to take a vacation, everything doesn't stop. Or if Frank is sick one day, or if Frank wins the lottery and retires, you're not stuck. You're not like, uh-oh. There's no uh-oh moments. Like setting up a system that is scalable and makes so that information is democratized and shared with the masses, it makes it takes so much strain off of an organization. I don't think people realize it until it happens, which is a tragic thing. Speaking of not realizing things until something happens, test drives are also a very important thing in engineering. I would argue they're actually important in life. I'll talk about engineering, then I'll talk about life, and then we'll go back to engineering. as we kind of think about it, I used to do pre-sales in my past life before I switched over to marketing. I did 3.5 years of PDM and DriveWorks pre-sales. So customer would call me up and say, I want to implement SolidWorks PDM and I need a workflow that does ABC. All right, fine. Yeah, I can do that. That's no problem. Here's a workflow that does like 85% of what you want. It's just some different names. That doesn't look like my workflow though. It's the same thing. I'm missing one step. Like here, I would click this button to add it, and then I just got to do some customization. But that's not my workflow. But and then you see where this is going. The sales rep says, "Oh, well, Nick, can't we just do a custom demo for them?" I guess, but the problem with custom demo is there's no promise of purchase, and that's time and effort that I'm putting into it. That ultimately, if they don't purchase it, is wasted effort. Now they closed at a very high rate. Like if a sales rep said, hey, let's do a custom DriveWorks demonstration, they almost always closed. But it was not fun doing those and going, I don't know if this is ever going to work out. And this isn't just an engineering problem. I bought a new car in February, even though it is a version of my dream car. It is a car that I have wanted ever since I learned how to drive. I still had to test drive it because it's a stick shift. So the first thing I had to do was, do I remember how to drive stick? Because I haven't done it in 5 years. And then I had to make sure the transmission felt good. And how's the steering? Am I comfortable with the steering? And are the seats too low? I had to answer all of these questions about my new car before I bought it. Now, was I probably going to buy it in the first place? Yeah, probably, as long as it wasn't terrible. But I do this at the grocery store. I love to cook, but I'm not going to buy an avocado that is mush or an avocado that is hard as a rock. I'm not going to buy bananas that are dark green because I like them to be a little bit, to be pretty yellow with some brown spots even, because then they're much sweeter. We do it with everything. And the problem, and Paul, you've kind of alluded to it already, is that unless we have a way of showing them that model and showing them that's my design, that's my thing, and giving them that source of pride, you can often struggle to maybe not close business, but you're struggling to give the customer that full picture that, really, if you could, they'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I would argue that it's a visualization problem, and we as engineers especially, we don't really grasp the concept that people don't really get drawings, right? I mean, that's how we speak. Yo hablo ANSI, right? But we will give somebody a drawing and, oh, well, no, that's not what I thought I was. What do you mean you didn't think that was ordering? I gave you a drawing. It's 2D. It's completely unambiguous. Well, people can't really take a 2D
drawings.
Do you? Okay.
I have a whole thing. I'll mention it in a second. Go on.
I won't even mention my drafting table downstairs with the T-squares. But still, we typically insist on, well, I'll send you an approval drawing and you can sign off on it. But that doesn't really give people an understanding of what it is that they're going to order. And like you said, you need to get people behind the wheel. You need to give them the ability to visualize themselves with the product. And we try to provide as best we can with 3D. We try to provide all these tools that are available now through the technology that we didn't have years ago to give them the experience to understand what they're going to be getting. We can do all kinds of calculations to say, oh, you want to order this pump? Well, here's the flow rate you're going to get. This is how much power is going to be required. This is what the curve's going to look like. We can give them all that information now for things that haven't even been manufactured yet. And we can do it all in real time with automation by building the design in something like DriveWorks and letting DriveWorks do all the calculations. And before people sign off on it, we can give them the experience of everything that they need to know about the product they're about to buy.
Aren't rules beautiful?
They are. They're a thing of beauty.
Everything comes down to, at least everything in engineering, very little is guesswork. I don't think I've been in a situation where I talk to a customer and we say, well, it just feels like it's this. And like they might start out that way. My old manager, Ryan Dow, used to say, give it a WAG. I don't remember exactly what it stands for. I know what the
yes.
I wasn't going to say it all. But,
yeah, I will.
that is what that is. And like, you might start out that way, but then you have to prove it in some way, shape, or form, whether that is you use simulation to validate your numbers or you run it through a table to be like, I think this is right, but here, let me double check. Very little is guesswork, and it shouldn't be guesswork, because if it's guesswork, you're not engineering, you're guessing, you're speculating, and that's something that you should leave for the market. Paul, you mentioned drawings. I have to say this thing. I've mentioned it to my dad. My dad works for GoEngineer, if you guys don't know. So I have worked with my dad, which is a very strange thing, but I've worked with him for the entirety of my career, my professional career. And he and I have had this discussion many times about drawings. There is a place for drawings. There's absolutely a place for drawings. I don't feel like there's a place for drawings in things that are designed in a 3D world. So like electrical schematics, yeah, you need 2D for the architecture and building plans and blueprints. Like you need to be 2D because that's the industry standard. I understand that. But if I am designing this thing, my little GoEngineer Yeti, I love this thing. I cannot for the life of me, and this is a factor of how I've grown up. Why would I design that in SolidWorks in 3 dimensions, then take it and put it into a 2D drawing to print out? And then I can read these numbers that if I just open it in eDrawings, I can just hit the measure tool, or I can do MBD, or I can just send someone the SolidWorks model, and only to then turn it back into 3D. I don't understand the 3D to 2D to 3D. It has always baffled me. And like I grew up at SolidWorks World. I grew up at SolidWorks World. My first memory is from SolidWorks World. 2D drawings drive me insane, and they're impossible to test drive with.
Yeah, I'm going to argue that it's not a matter of we need 2D. I think it's a matter of we need documentation.
That's fair. I will give you that.
Yeah, and 2D is, pieces of paper are really what we've come to learn are documents. We're starting more and more to accept that you can have electronic documents, but again, unless it's some kind of standardized format, we still don't really feel like it's documented.
Yeah,
I think that's what it is.
And
I've worked with your dad long enough that I'll back him up.
You have. It's one of those weird things. Like people in this industry, they just know my dad. They'll come up to me like, "I love your dad." It's like, I didn't know you knew my dad, but everybody does. It's a strange thing. Like I do like DraftSight. Like DraftSight's the 2D drafting tool that we support, and I'm a big fan of it. Again, in specific applications, but I don't want to design something in 2D to then turn it into 3D in most cases. But I'll give you that. It is all about the documentation side of things and being able to document all of that. Here's kind of your phrase. I keep forgetting to change the slides because really this is just more of a conversation, but I made that's my product. You can't really do that with a 2D drawing. At least it's hard to do that with a 2D drawing, unless you're a really skilled engineer. And as you said, yo hablo ANSI. No hablo ANSI. I don't do drawings. I try. I vaguely understand it, but there's a reason I stopped engineering school after a year and switched over to business school. I liked it, and I didn't have to deal with drawings anymore. So that made a lot of sense to me. Our last manufacturing bottleneck that I want to bring up is inadequate resource planning. And truly, this is a terrible way to describe what we're talking about, I think. Really, the better way to describe it is disconnected systems leading to gaps and leading to holes in the system. And you're going to run into problems. And I need to pull up the notes because I have some things that you specifically said, Paul. But one of the big things that I think we need to remember is the very old adage in sales, which is under promise, over deliver. And the first thing I think about here is lead time. It is very easy for a sales rep to go to a customer and say, "I'll get that to you tomorrow." And if that's like the customer saying, "I want to order this thing," and the sales rep says, you will have it tomorrow, that's great and all. But if the sales process is completely disconnected and unknown for the engineering side of things, well, they might promise that. And then lo and behold, Frank is actually out of the office this week, so we can't even estimate it. But it was promised to the customer tomorrow. Well, I understand it's Tuesday, but he's not back until next Monday. Sorry. And that's a difficult problem. So the last thing we want is when manufacturing operates separately from other business systems, or when engineering operates separate from manufacturing, it leads to disruptions in production schedules. It leads to delays. It's really important to have a real-time integration because A, it lets you get accurate quotes. We kind of talked about that with the inconsistent quoting practices. As we're kind of talking about that, like being able to accurately generate a quote right now. Like I could build someone a quote. If someone came to me right now and said, "I need a PDM upgrade right now," I could do that in QuoteWorks and have you an accurate price in less than 5 minutes. That is a huge thing. And like, I don't even do that anymore, but I can. And it's because what I know has been synced up to what our sales team knows, has been synced up to what our engineering managers know, has been synced up to our backlog as well. So like we're able to know, yeah, we can give you this project in X number of days or X number of hours, and it'll take this long. That has all been calculated. And it lets us be more realistic with what we promise to customers. And I think that there's a lot of power in that. And Paul, there's something specifically that you said that I want to get to here in a second. But before we jump into the specific verbiage, like this lets us, we worry about ERP, we worry about MRP, MES, pick another 3-letter acronym that we might use to describe a system. We worry about all of those systems, but if we link them together, we can at least pull the correct information from those systems when we need it and how we need it and in the correct format.
Right. Yeah. Everything, when you come down to the systems and PDM, you always hear the phrase system of truth. You know, you have to have a system of truth. So the concept there is that every piece of information should reside somewhere, one place, one and only one place. And every other system should have the ability to get at that information, but everybody needs to agree that this is the system that rules that information. If you want that information, you have to go to that system to get that. And DriveWorks firmly believes that. And what we really focus on is we focus on being friendly, playing well with others. So once we recognize, okay, well, who is the system of truth for raw material pricing? Oh, that's the ERP system. Okay, well, I tell you what, I'm going to set up a way where I can ask the ERP system for the raw material pricing that I need in order to calculate the total price for this thing you're ordering. And I need to understand the process as a whole. And DriveWorks is all about playing well with others. So once you start to put DriveWorks into a process, you start to, at first, just get a feel and say, okay, well, where is everything? Where do I have to go to get this? Where should I send this information that I generate? Who's going to hold on to it? Who's going to be in charge of it? And we're very nice and friendly. I mean, it's a British company, so they're always terribly polite about.
DriveWorks was a great preschooler. Like a great preschooler.
Yeah. So, I mean, even when we go to do data queries, we're polite about it. You know, please, sir, may I have that information? And what it generally turns into is, you know, from a process perspective, everybody else in the process starts to kind of like DriveWorks and say, hey, you know, welcome. Thanks for being so polite and asking for that information. And DriveWorks starts to say, okay, well, you know what? I can actually do other things also. That information that you need me to give you, I can put it in whatever format you want. Oh, you can. So now all of a sudden we go from this, you know, I'm just a tool here gathering information and collecting information. Now, once people start to see what DriveWorks can do in terms of generating content, in terms of aggregating content, in terms of collecting content from everywhere, doing calculations, doing full design, the whole process of the design itself, and coming up with the information that needs to be generated, we can now generate the whole bill of materials. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I have that bill of materials information. I know you're the system of truth for bombs. I'm more than happy to let you hold it and maintain it. What would be the most convenient way for me to deliver it to you? So when we start doing DriveWorks implementations, we always start off with, okay, well, from a DriveWorks perspective, here's what I need to generate the SolidWorks models. Let me kind of get the lay of the land, figure out how to get everything. Then once we get there, we get that set up and we start earning our return on investment back, we start to say, okay, let's look around at the process and see what we can do to make the process better. Because in the past, engineering has always been, no, they're the ones with the information. We just have to deal with the bleep that they give us, right? Engineering has a big pile of data. It's another 4-letter word we'll use. A big pile of data that they just kind of throw downstream and everyone has to just deal with it, right? Well, we have this thing that takes the BOM in Excel and then rips through it and puts it into the ERP system. Well, why do you do that? Well, that's how engineering gives it to us. We just have to deal with it. Well, no, it's not that way anymore, because automation can pre-process that information and give it to you in a way that'll go straight into ERP. So what that ends up doing is now we see engineering as a part of the process that's actually contributing to the process rather than being the ones that everybody has to work around. Perfect example. I think you wanted the company in Tennessee that I worked with.
I did. Yes.
So the idea here was we had already gotten DriveWorks in there. They made hydraulic cylinders, and I mean, this thing was knocking out 1,000 cylinders an hour. No problem, was cranking out all this data. And we said, you know what? Let's go ahead, and we need to do the drawings, your favorite drawings. Why don't we, if we're going to have it generate drawings, why don't we go out and talk to the people who are going to be consuming the drawings to find out what they need from the drawings? So I physically went out to the shop and talked to the folks that were on the machines. And one of the machinists said, look, I can tell you exactly which drafter made a drawing without looking at the title block, because this guy over here, he always puts this dimension here and this dimension over here. And that woman over there, she never even puts in this dimension I need. I always have to pull out a calculator and calculate it. And this kid over here just does it this way. And then there was this just kind of inconsistency and kind of the drafters had their own style for how they put out the drawings. And it literally slowed the shop down because they had to find the information they needed on the drawing. So instead we said, okay, well, just tell us what information you need, where you want it, and we'll make sure that DriveWorks puts the information you want in the format you want it in the same place every time, period. And at that point, their rework went down. They literally stopped having to throw parts out because of misread drawings, because the machinist would just grab the drawing. They knew exactly where the number was. It was literally in the upper right-hand corner for them. We made a little table. DriveWorks populated that table every single time. So the person who was cutting the tubes just found the length, cut them, passed it over. Where the holes get drilled, boom, boom. They're right there every time. So by just looking at the process and by, again, being a polite British citizen saying, you know, how may I help, sir? We were able to give them the information that they need and be a contributing part of the process rather than the one everybody has to work around.
It's interesting. You mentioned it right at the top. I'm going to rehash it. We think of DriveWorks, or a lot of people think of DriveWorks. I don't think you and I do, but when DriveWorks is first introduced to people, they say, oh, the SolidWorks automation tool. Mm-hmm. I mean, sure, yeah, it does that. And ultimately, because it's flashy. And as someone that is in marketing, like, what's going to make a bigger impact? Something that has bright flashing lights, or something that is like holding up a piece of paper that's written on a pencil? I guarantee you the bright flashy lights are going to do better in 95% of scenarios. The same is true here, though, because DriveWorks is going to save the design department a whole lot of time, because now I'm not designing the same thing 36 different times, when realistically I'm designing the same thing just with a slightly modified number. Nothing else really changes. I'm saving a lot of time there. But where I'm going to save a whole lot of time is consistent resources and consistent information and dissemination of that information. That's a tongue twister. Being able to push that information into ERP consistently and in the right format, being able to create drawings where the dimension is always in the right place, formatted correctly, and easy to read. That is such a game changer. And I don't like that I keep saying this, but it's one of those things that once you do it, you're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think about that? We actually had a customer, and we've got 4.5 minutes left until this whole thing ends, so I'll try to do this quickly. We had a customer that they've had DriveWorks for years and years and years and years. They upfit trucks and love what they do. And they brought me on site one day and they said, so we need to build a bottom a lot better. We need to, like, a very detailed bill of material. Currently we do this process where, like, we go into, I don't remember what system they were using, but we go into our system, then we pull these numbers, then we put them in Excel. There's Excel again. And then we populate those numbers, but then we have to make sure we change the quantities and we have to send it to this other person. I went, why? Again, why do you do this? Stop using Excel to make quotes. Don't do that, please. And they said, well, can DriveWorks do it? And I said, yes, without a doubt in my mind. Like, I don't think I thought about it. Like, I looked at their BOM and I said, DriveWorks do that. And they're like, well, can you tell us how? Yeah, I guess so. And I did a custom demo for them. But where that ended up working out was they did end up buying basically the custom demonstration from me. So they were able to use that as the jumpstart. But by the end of it, it's like, oh, well, you can definitely do that. And I've maintained a relationship with their DriveWorks admin. She and I email back and forth every now and then, just seeing how she's doing with the project. And it's just one of those things where she's like, I now engineering, they're not the masters of this information. These systems are, but they're able to get that information from other systems, push it to the correct system in the correct format consistently and easily. Like you can't miss a step. You can't type something, or maybe you can type something in wrong, but like that's your biggest nightmare is I typed the number in wrong, not I forgot to do half of it, which it happens.
And we can put in validation rules to run checks and make sure that everything adds up.
Make sure it's a legit email and someone didn't just type in A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Yeah, there's all kinds of things we can do. And like I said, we're done in like 2 minutes. So I'm going to wrap us up here. But I keep wanting to say podcast. Paul, thank you for joining me on this webinar to kind of go through that white paper and that article that I wrote. If you're curious about it, it's on GoEngineer's LinkedIn account. So if you go on there and look at our articles, it should be like October, I think I published it. It's also on the DriveWorks website. I know that I talked to Jess, your marketing manager, and she was super excited about getting it published on the DriveWorks blog. So it is up there as well. So definitely go check that out. And if you want to reach out and contact me, here's my contact information. Again, I'm in marketing, but I can definitely connect you to the right people. If you're curious about more things with DriveWorks or my opinions on drawings, which again, there is a place for them. I'm just confused when I have a 3D printer sitting next to me, why I would make a 2D drawing of it instead of just going file print in 3D. I find that to be easier, but that doesn't work in every situation. And I recognize that. So I'm not saying drawings suck. I'm saying I don't understand making them for every single situation. We don't need them for all of them, but enough ranting.
I'm going to talk to your dad, get you some drafting tools for Christmas.
He actually spoiled what he got me for Christmas. So unfortunately it's not drafting tools, but maybe for my birthday. Paul, you and I will have to talk all about it at 3D Experience World down in Dallas and then at DriveWorks World. So final plug for that. If you are a DriveWorks customer, make sure you register for DriveWorks World. Paul, it's in April, mid-April, I think.
Yep.
So yeah, if you are an active DriveWorks customer, go to the DriveWorks website, make sure you register. You'll be able to watch where I talk all about QuoteWorks. That'll all be there. But that's all we've got. So we're going to wrap up right here. So thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.